employees? Okay, how many? 60, okay.
54.
54, okay, so you're just over one threshold. How about over 20? Okay, over 15? 10? 5? Okay, 2? And then of course 1. So, and you'll see in just a moment where that all plays in. But I just wanted to make sure that as you think about whether you are staying because of your niche, you're not necessarily thinking about growing, but you're providing a service that works for you, or if you are in fact thinking about growing, then of course you want to think about these other things. So the next number 2 was not hiring or promoting the right person. What's so easy? What happens so easy in a small business when it's time to fill a position? Who's one of the first individuals that might ask you for a job?
Family and friends.
Family and friends. Now, we come from a situation where we always want someone to refer their family and friends. They want to feel that good about their business. That's not always the funnest environment. Sometimes it can be. We all want to be a family. But when you start to get into some of the issues, really think through, what it means when you're now having to discuss issues with family and friends. So again, first of all, a lot of times as you're growing, you may not have existing hiring practices, or if you've established them, they may not be as strong as they need to be. So again, when you think about hiring practices, first of all, as you grow or as you need to hire, what's your source of hiring? Is it solely family and friends? Do you actually have some relationships with some DeVry? For me, I'm ex-Navy. When I need an operator, a computer operator or a mechanical operator, man, I head for the reserve centers. Those guys coming off active duty, they're excellent. They're looking for a new career. They've had 4 or 5 years with some intense training, and they're great. So I always look, make sure you have a source and think ahead. When you have that need, have you already sprinkled and salted the mine so that you don't have to accept just the first person that asked you for a job, and in fact, really think about whether it's right for family and friends. And if you hire family and friends, make sure that it's very specific about what everybody's role is. Sound interviewing and offering practices. We won't go into it too much, but certainly there's behavioral interviewing. There are questions you should or shouldn't ask. I wouldn't say that most questions, you'll probably hear this, that they're illegal to ask. The questions themselves aren't really illegal to ask. It's what you do with the information that you hear when you ask those questions that makes someone say, oops, you didn't hire me because you asked me if I had kids, or why am I walking with a crutch. You may just be personally interested and care very much. But if you don't hire that person, they're going to assume that's why they weren't hired. So think about that, and again, we can talk about any practices that y'all want. The other thing too is you never know in today's environment what's out there in someone's background. Sometimes you think you know someone. Do you really know? Are you doing employment verifications? Are you doing background checks? So many times when you are going to become liable for what somebody else does, you might really want to know what's out there and what potentially is there. One of my personal examples, and it's one of these things that as a leader, until you experience it, you may not believe it. And somebody says it's a percentage hit, I interviewed an individual out in Ventura, California. I was just really impressed with the individual. I was looking for a mechanic, so I needed someone that looked mechanic-y and worked on car engines and all that kind of stuff. And we just hit it off pretty well. Well, of course, that's before I was in HR, so I hired the guy, got around to finally filling out a reference check, which you prayed, as operators, we always prayed that we'd get a reference check that no one would answer our questions, so we could wouldn't answer our questions. So got the HR department, they wouldn't answer our questions. So I called the first reference on the application, and he said, "You hired that bum?" And I went, "Oh, no." And I said, "Oh, what was your relationship?" "I'm his father-in-law." And I said, "What?" I said, "Well, okay, I'll get past that. The experience he had, he's been in prison the last 10 years. And I'm like, oh my gosh, And so I'd already hired the guy, all right? And probably against the supervisor's wishes, because they probably didn't click as well as I did, but I was the plant manager. I could decide what I wanted to do. And so the guy never got a great start, right? I still believed in the guy because I thought, okay, he's my project. I'll get him on the right path. Well, he lasted about a year. Nothing he did personally wrong, but the supervisor wasn't supportive. And he finally had a little relapse and got thrown in jail, missed a week because he violated probation, missed a week and I had to fire him for a job abandonment, right? Probably best for everyone. But we learn from those experiences. So one innate talent from leaders is, can you learn from your experiences? So all these years you think, I really like this person. Well, sometimes look at the percentages and is it the right thing for your business? Maybe it is that project. Maybe it's time for that, because we all need to experience that. We all need to feel that, that philanthropic part of doing those things. But be careful about it. In not knowing what you need, is that individual a cultural and a competency fit? Will they get along with your group? That is so critical. I do like to think, though, that culture happens. Culture happens from the way you treat your employees, the way you expect your people to treat other people in your company. And then culture happens. But you do need to kind of get a roadmap of where you want to go. Identify some competencies. Make sure that that's all working for you. Workforce planning. That's what we were talking about ahead. Looking, if I grow, what will I need when? And start planning for that. What kind of wages will I need? What kind of skill sets will I need? And within that, then job descriptions. That is the most unsettling thing for an individual, is to not know what they're supposed to be doing. In a small business, it's so easy to have a job description. And trust me, when I came into HMS 3 years ago, and they were growing again, they had gone through some change, and they had about 250 employees. They had 600 job descriptions, probably 100 of which had Sally's a good person, duties as assigned, right? We're going back to the 1990s when we had to do ADA compliant job descriptions, so that was one of my block and tackling responsibilities as we did that. But do it the best you can to give them an idea of what they're supposed to do, because you're going to then hold them accountable for that. And then the other is using faulty logic when hiring or promoting. And the example here, not just family and friends because they're family and friends, but this one is, the example might be similar to like we do with committees. Now that's a little different. When you put somebody on a committee, it's, well, they really don't agree with that, so I'm going to put them in charge of that committee so they will get involved with that. Well, don't do that in a job. Well, they're not really very good at this, so if I put them in that job, they'll get better at it. Now, so if you do that, be very specific on what your intentions are. But be very careful, because that's another statistical play. In a small business, that might be a very key position. And if they don't do the good job, and you now have to do their job, and you weren't planning on it, you may then feel the impact of that. So let's hit some real quick highlights. Next slide. Sorry. We've got how to hire lawfully. Do have every applicant for employment fill out an application. That's so hard today with the electronic age. Whenever you're held accountable then for affirmative action, an application is the key. And what do you do with that application? Employment verification. Reference checks are so hard today. All the HR departments tell all their supervisors, don't you dare tell anyone anything about any employee, because we'll be sued if you say anything bad. They send to HR, and we say, well, we can confirm they were here from this date to that date, but they don't give them any information, even though I personally believe, and if it's true, tell it. I have to tell my supervisors, don't do it, because they statistically will get me in trouble by not doing it correctly. So employment verification is important, though, because that validates what they put on an application. You'd be surprised how many people do that. And do background checks. Just so you know, what's the biggest fear that y'all should have today when you want to look at a background check? What's the one thing that you might say, I'm not going to hire that person no matter what level of crime or whatever it was? That's one. That's a good one. That wasn't what I was going to think of, but it's
Very good one.
it's violence. Any sense of violence, family, domestic violence, anything like that, right? Of course, if they're in an accounting role, any theft or check kiting, et cetera, but sexual harassment, which is really a form of violence in a sense. So those violence things, really look for that. And then again, have job descriptions for each so you can talk to it. Yes, question?
I've recently seen a bid opportunity that suggested, I think it was a 10-year background check, and someone wrote a question in the RFP process and stated that they thought the state law was 7 years is all you could go back. Can you clarify?
Well, and again,
Some people tell me you can look at anything, but you can only base your hiring decision.
I'll let Christy tell me on that. Yes, you can look at anything. We tend to say only give me 7 years.
Yeah.
Whether, to be honest, now I'm an operator getting into HR, but it's been 17 years. Is that legally 7 years, or it's just traditionally 7 years? That's almost like 7 years on your credit history.
Exactly, and it's more,
It's more practice. It's not illegal to look at any length of time.
That's what I was thinking.
You can go, as long as you're consistent, as long as it's looked at for everybody that you're looking at. You don't just go back 10 years on one and find something that was 8 years
Right.
old, but everyone
Right.
else you looked at 7 years.
Right.
Just as a rule of thumb, kind of something to keep in mind is what's going to get in at court in order to make a witness look bad. If we're trying to discredit a witness, not on a hiring issue, but if we're trying to make a witness look unreliable and dishonest, it's 10 years. Is what the courts, how far back the courts will let us bring up something that came up, a
Okay.
conviction or something. So yeah, you can go back any length of time as long as you're doing it consistently, and ideally as long as it's related to the job.
Okay.
Can I ask one other?
Yeah, go ahead.
I worked for a large company at one point, and their rule was, as you described, don't say anything basically, was the official company policy that confirmed dates of work. But some people would give a personal recommendation of those they said, would say, well, the official company position is, they were here, they worked in the job that you asked. But personally, I could say, they were an outstanding person. Does that provide any liability to the company, or
Yes,
it does?
yes.
Even if the person says person, okay.
They're saying it because they know that person through the job and they got
Right.
called at work. If they run into him at church, they can say, look, just he's a good guy, that's fine. But they got called at work because of the job.
Okay.
Gotcha. Thank
All right,
you.
we're gonna move quickly, okay, so don't accept resumes if you don't have a position open, because if you accept one and you don't hire them, they're still gonna claim you didn't hire them for a reason other than that. Be careful about how you use any kind of testing. There are honesty tests that we recommend you do not do, but then some of y'all may do pre-employment testings, or you may think about it, as long as they're validated studies. Again, it's one of those percentage plays. Never try to never let it be the sole reason you chose or did not choose an applicant. And then be very careful when you use offer letters. I always do offer letters that only extend commitment only as far as the next pay period. Your biweekly salary is, your weekly salary is. A lot of people will put in annual salaries. Some people will try to say that was a commitment for a year. So.
And some courts agree.
So be very careful how you do that if you use offer letters at all. Try to keep everything in the commitment of the next period of time. Okay, next slide. Again, real quick, we're gonna hit some of these. State, federal, go ahead and hit these, we'll run them down. Hiring, compensation, classification, all sorts of federal laws for all these things, right? And then next slide. Make sure that you get your I-9 forms done. Again, what we're talking about here is penalties, and they're looking now for all these reasons to get money from us businesses for having violations. So don't forget about your compliance in your hiring practices, I-9s. Okay, next one is ignoring government regulations. So Christy's gonna step back up and cover government regulations.
Okay, I am, and I know the variance that we have in this room for the number of employees is actually perfect for this particular issue, this slide. Size does make a difference when it comes to the law and what kind of, what you're subject to, what obligations you're subject to. First of all, every company is subject to at least unemployment. When I was a solo practitioner, I was my only flat-out employee, and in theory, I remember having really frustrating conversations with the Texas Workforce Commission on this. In theory, I could have fired myself and collected unemployment against myself. So I still had to fill out all the forms as if I had 30 employees. So that's unemployment is everyone, is every company.